Ladies and gentlemen, fear is a universal experience, shared across all cultures, ages, and backgrounds. To truly eliminate fear, or at the very least gain mastery over it, we must begin by understanding its origin. Fear is not simply an emotion that appears arbitrarily or without cause. It is a biological mechanism that has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. In the early days of human existence, fear served a critical function. It kept our ancestors alive. When facing predators, natural disasters, or unfamiliar environments, fear triggered the body to prepare for action. It activated what we now call the fight or flight response, a process that releases stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, sharpens focus, increases heart rate, and sends more oxygen to the muscles. In the presence of real physical danger, this automatic response was essential for survival. However, the world has changed significantly since those primitive times. The types of threats we face today are rarely life-threatening. We are not running from lions or surviving in the wilderness. Instead, we face abstract fears: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of embarrassment, fear of loss, fear of judgment, fear of uncertainty. These fears are no longer linked to physical danger, yet our brains and bodies respond as if they are. This is because the human brain does not always differentiate between real and perceived threats. The same system that once kept us alive is now being triggered by emails, presentations, social situations, financial concerns, and even our own negative thoughts. In essence, fear has become less about protection and more about limitation. One important aspect of understanding fear is recognizing that it often arises from anticipated pain, not actual pain. Fear tends to live in the future. It is a projection of what might happen, not what is happening. The brain imagines a possible negative outcome and reacts as though it is already taking place. For example, someone might avoid public speaking because they fear being laughed at, even though no such event has occurred. The mere anticipation of discomfort is enough to cause the body and mind to retreat. This is the beginning of avoidance behavior, which strengthens the fear over time and makes it more difficult to confront. Another root cause of fear lies in our mental conditioning. From a young age, we are taught to be cautious. We are warned against risks, failure, mistakes, and nonconformity. Over time, this conditioning embeds certain beliefs into our subconscious: that failure is dangerous, that judgment is painful, and that security should always come before growth. These messages are reinforced by parents, teachers, media, and society. Without realizing it, we inherit fears that were never truly our own. Many of the limitations we accept as truth are simply inherited narratives, recycled fears passed down from others who themselves never examined or overcame them. Additionally, fear is amplified by uncertainty and lack of control. The human brain craves predictability. When we enter situations that are unknown or uncontrollable, our natural response is to become anxious and fearful. This is why stepping outside our comfort zone often feels so terrifying. It removes our sense of familiarity and stability. However, it is precisely in those moments of uncertainty that growth becomes possible. The problem is that our biological wiring pulls us away from that discomfort and back into safety. If we do not recognize this reflex for what it is, a survival mechanism rather than a rational assessment, we may continue to avoid situations that actually hold the potential for transformation. It's also important to realize that fear thrives in the absence of clarity. When we don't fully understand a situation, or when we leave questions unanswered in our minds, fear fills the gaps with worst-case scenarios. A lack of information leads the imagination to invent problems that don't exist. This is why taking time to investigate, learn, and explore unknown areas of our lives can often reduce fear dramatically. The more we understand, the less room fear has to grow. Clarity is a natural enemy of fear, and curiosity is one of the most powerful tools we can use to combat it. Understanding fear also requires acknowledging its disguises. It doesn't always show up as a loud, trembling panic. Often, it appears as procrastination, perfectionism, avoidance, overthinking, or even aggression. These are defense mechanisms, ways our mind tries to cope with or hide from fear. Recognizing these signs in our behavior helps us trace them back to the source. When we pause and ask ourselves, what am I really afraid of here? We open the door to awareness, and awareness is always the first step toward change. Ultimately, fear is not the enemy, it is a messenger. It tells us where we are limiting ourselves, where our beliefs need updating, and where our next level of growth lies. When we understand its origin, its purpose, and its patterns, we take back our power. We begin to see that fear can be dismantled not through force, but through knowledge, attention, and action. And once we understand it, we can begin the process of destroying it forever. One of the most important steps in overcoming fear is learning to distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. The mind is a powerful storyteller. It can convince us of dangers that do not actually exist. This is where most fear originates, not from real, immediate threats, but from illusions created by the mind. While real danger is a physical and present risk to our survival, fear is often a projected response to something that might happen in the future. Understanding this difference is crucial because the mind treats both situations similarly, whether the danger is real or imagined. The brain often reacts with the same biological intensity, triggering anxiety, stress, and avoidance behaviors. Real danger is objective. It is something that can be observed and verified in the moment, standing in the middle of traffic, being near a wild animal, or experiencing a natural disaster. In these scenarios, fear is protective. It acts as a warning system designed to keep us safe. But in the modern world, most people are rarely in true physical danger. Instead, the fear they experience is subjective. It is rooted in the fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of not being good enough, or fear of being judged. These are not dangers to our physical well-being. They are threats to our ego, our identity, and our sense of self-worth. And yet, the body responds as if they are matters of life and death. This misfiring of the fear response is what creates the illusion. The illusion of fear makes us avoid opportunities, relationships, decisions, and experiences that could actually benefit us. For example, someone might feel intense fear before a job interview. Logically, they know the situation is safe. They are not at risk of physical harm. But emotionally, their mind is responding as if they are facing a predator. The heart races, palms sweat, and thoughts become clouded. The fear in this case is not tied to reality, but to imagined consequences. What if I mess up? What if they don't like me? What if I fail? These imagined outcomes are not certain, yet the fear feels just as real as if they were. The illusion becomes more dangerous when it goes unchallenged. If you never question the fear, it begins to control your actions. You start to withdraw from life, from challenges, from chances to grow. You avoid speaking up, starting new projects, taking risks, or expressing yourself authentically, not because danger is present, but because the mind has tricked you into believing it is. This is how fear shrinks lives. It convinces people to stay small, quiet, safe, and hidden, even when there is no actual threat. Over time, this creates a comfort zone that becomes more like a prison, where the fear of what could happen outweighs the reality of what is happening. To break this illusion, one must begin to observe fear objectively. When fear arises, instead of reacting immediately, ask yourself, is this fear based on a real, immediate danger, or is it based on something imagined? Is my life at risk, or is this just uncomfortable? Is there evidence to support this fear, Or is my mind playing out a negative fantasy? These questions help you separate emotion from fact. They create space between the stimulus and your response, allowing logic and awareness to step in. In that space, you gain clarity, and with clarity, fear begins to lose its grip. It's also important to understand that the brain is designed to err on the side of caution. It would rather trigger a false alarm than miss a real threat. This is known as negativity bias, the tendency of the brain to focus more on potential problems than potential rewards. From an evolutionary standpoint, this made sense, but in today's world, it often works against us. When the brain assumes the worst, it creates stories that support fear. I'm not ready, this will end badly, they'll reject me, I'll never recover. These are not facts, they are thoughts, and thoughts can be changed. Overcoming the illusion of fear does not mean you stop feeling fear altogether. It means you stop letting fear make your decisions. It means you learn to recognize when fear is lying to you, when it is exaggerating, when it is imagining outcomes that are not grounded in truth. It also means learning to move forward with fear, acknowledging it, facing it, and still choosing to act. Because courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision that something else is more important than fear. By drawing a clear line between real danger and imagined fear, you begin to reclaim your power. You stop living according to assumptions and start living according to reality. And when you operate from a place of truth instead of illusion, fear begins to dissolve. You see that most of the things you were afraid of never actually happen. They only lived in your head, and when you stop feeding those illusions, fear loses its power forever. One of the most overlooked tools in destroying fear is awareness. It may sound simple, even passive, but awareness is not a weak force. It is the first act of reclaiming control over your mind. Fear thrives in darkness, in the hidden, unspoken corners of your thoughts. It builds strength when ignored and multiplies when suppressed. But the moment you become aware of fear and consciously acknowledge it, you strip it of its ability to control you from the shadows. This is not a mental trick or a motivational catchphrase. It is a discipline. Acknowledgement is the first act of bravery, and it opens the door to real transformation. Most people spend their lives either denying fear or running from it. They distract themselves with busy schedules, numb themselves with entertainment, or rationalize their avoidance by saying, "It's just not the right time," or "I'm not ready." But underneath those explanations is often fear. The fear of not being enough, of being judged, of failing, of losing control, of the unknown. When you refuse to look at fear directly, it grows in strength. It feeds on neglect. But when you shine a light on it, when you say, "Yes, I am afraid of this," you create space between yourself and the emotion. That space allows you to see the fear as an object, not as your identity. You are not your fear, you are the observer of it. Awareness is powerful because it allows you to separate the trigger from the reaction. Instead of being swept away by fear, you can pause and examine it. You can ask, where did this come from? Is this fear based on something I learned in the past? Is it a habit? Was it inherited from someone else's voice? Parents, teachers, peers, media? Is it even mine? Or is it something I picked up and never questioned? These questions help unearth the source of the fear, which is almost always deeper than the situation you're currently facing. It's not just about the job interview, the speech, the conversation, the risk. It's about what those things represent. Failure, rejection, humiliation, loss. Awareness helps you make these hidden layers visible. Acknowledgement is not about dwelling in fear. It's about facing it with clarity. Many people think that if they admit they're afraid, they are showing weakness, but it's the opposite. Avoidance is weakness. Silence is surrender. Acknowledging fear is a strength because it requires honesty. It takes maturity to admit, "Yes, I'm scared of this," without self-judgment or shame. That admission is the beginning of inner freedom. When you admit what you feel, You stop pretending. You stop acting like everything is fine when inside you are frozen. That authenticity removes the internal conflict between your emotions and your outward behavior, and that alignment is a major step toward reclaiming personal power. Moreover, when you name your fear, you limit its ability to manipulate you. Unnamed fear is vague, and vagueness is dangerous. A vague sense of dread keeps you stuck because you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. But the moment you name it, I'm afraid of being judged, I'm afraid of losing control, I'm afraid of not being good enough, you define it, and what is defined can be dealt with. You can't fight a shadow, but you can face a shape. Naming fear transforms it from an overwhelming force into a manageable experience. Another reason awareness and acknowledgement are so powerful is that they stop the cycle of shame. Many people not only feel fear, but also feel ashamed of their fear. They think, I shouldn't feel this way, or I'm weak for being scared. That shame adds another layer of resistance. Now they're not just afraid, they're afraid of being afraid. This double layer traps people in avoidance and silence. But when you choose to be fully honest and say, this is what I feel, and I'm allowed to feel it, you neutralize the shame. You allow yourself to be human, and that humanity becomes the starting point for growth. True courage is not about pretending you don't feel fear. It is about being deeply aware of your fear, acknowledging its presence, and still choosing to move forward. Awareness brings you out of reactivity and into choice. Acknowledgement makes your inner world more real than your imagined fears, and when you live in truth, fear begins to dissolve. You no longer need to run from it, hide it, or suppress it. You simply see it, accept it, and act in spite of it. Fear cannot survive in the presence of awareness, because awareness exposes it. It reveals the illusion. It gives you the power to act consciously instead of reacting automatically. And that's how fear is destroyed, not by force, not by pretending it doesn't exist, but by looking it in the eye and saying, I see you, and I'm still going forward. Fear is a conditioned response. It is something the brain learns through experience, repetition, and memory. That also means it can be unlearned. The human brain is not static. It is highly adaptable. This quality is known as neuroplasticity, and it means the brain can form new neural pathways throughout life. So, if fear is a learned pattern of response, it can be rewired through deliberate exposure and action. Rewiring the mind is not a theoretical concept. It is a proven process of training the brain to stop reacting to fear with avoidance, and instead respond with confidence, calm, and control. At the root of fear is a simple cycle. You experience discomfort, and your instinct tells you to avoid it. Each time you obey that instinct, you reinforce the idea that the situation is dangerous. Avoidance becomes a habit. The brain says, we survived by staying away, and it learns that fear equals escape. Over time, this wiring grows stronger. The fear becomes automatic. You may not even think, it just happens. You hesitate, freeze, back away, or procrastinate. The mind now assumes that anything uncomfortable must be a threat. Breaking this cycle requires the opposite of avoidance. It requires exposure, not overwhelming exposure, but intentional exposure, gradual steps into the situations that trigger fear. When you begin to face what you fear, even in small doses, you send new information to the brain. You show it that the fear was exaggerated, that you can handle the discomfort, that danger isn't present. Each successful exposure becomes evidence that the fear is not as powerful as it once seemed. This builds a new pattern, fear followed by action, action followed by success, and success followed by rewired confidence. The key to effective exposure is consistency and control. You don't need to face the biggest version of your fear on day one. In fact, doing so can be counterproductive and cause re-traumatization. What you need is controlled exposure, intentional challenges that are uncomfortable but not overwhelming. For example, someone afraid of public speaking doesn't need to address a stadium crowd right away. They can start by speaking in small meetings, recording themselves, or practicing in front of friends. These experiences train the brain that discomfort is not danger. Over time, the neural pathways associated with panic begin to fade and new ones, associated with confidence, begin to take their place. Action is the second half of the formula. While exposure brings you face to face with fear, action builds the muscle to move through it. Every time you take action despite fear, you disprove the belief that fear must stop you. You teach yourself that you are capable. The act of doing rewrites the mental story that says, I can't. Fear says pause, action says proceed. And each step forward chips away at the old identity shaped by fear. You stop identifying as someone who hides, and you begin to see yourself as someone who confronts, tries, grows, and transforms. What many people fail to realize is that confidence does not come before action. It comes after. Most people wait to feel confident before they act, but that is not how the brain works. Action creates confidence. Each time you act in the face of fear, no matter how small the action, your self-image begins to change. You no longer see yourself as someone who is held back. You begin to see evidence of strength, and that self-image is what keeps the momentum going. Of course, discomfort is inevitable. There will be anxiety. There will be self-doubt, but those are not signs to stop. They are signs of rewiring in progress. Discomfort means the old patterns are being disrupted. It means growth is happening. The more you lean into discomfort, the more desensitized you become. Just as a person builds physical endurance through repeated physical effort, you build mental resilience through repeated emotional challenge. What once felt terrifying eventually becomes manageable. What was once overwhelming becomes routine. Rewiring the mind is not a one-time act. It is a daily discipline. It requires a willingness to lean into fear, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's messy, even when progress feels slow. But over time, this commitment transforms who you are at the core. You begin to act from a place of possibility rather than limitation. Your world expands. You say yes to things you once avoided. You speak, lead, start, risk, and evolve. Not because the fear has vanished completely, but because it no longer runs your life. Through exposure and action, fear loses its grip. And as your brain learns that fear is not fatal, but simply a feeling, you begin to destroy it. Not with willpower alone, but with repetition, evidence, and growth. That is how fear is rewired. That is how it is replaced. And that is how it is destroyed forever. Fear is most powerful when the mind is unoccupied or fixated on uncertainty. It grows in the absence of direction and purpose. One of the most effective ways to weaken and ultimately destroy fear is to replace it with a focus that is larger, deeper, and more purposeful than the fear itself. Fear can't exist with the same intensity in a mind that is filled with meaning. Purpose has a centering effect. It realigns thoughts, clarifies values, and strengthens commitment to action. When your energy is directed toward a clear purpose, fear becomes background noise rather than the main narrative. People often think the opposite of fear is courage, but in practice it is clarity. Clarity of purpose eliminates much of the indecision that fear thrives on. When you don't know why you're doing something, your mind has space to entertain doubts. What if I fail? What if this doesn't work? What will people think? But when you know your purpose, when you have a powerful why, those questions become less persuasive. The emotional charge behind them weakens. Your focus is no longer on the possibility of failure, but on the necessity of action. Purpose turns fear into a distraction instead of a decision maker. Fear tends to focus your mind inward, on your limitations, your insecurities, and the risks to your comfort. Purpose, on the other hand, turns your attention outward and forward. It directs your energy toward what matters more than fear: contribution, progress, service, fulfillment, and growth. For example, a teacher who is terrified of public speaking can overcome that fear more easily if they remember that their words are helping students succeed. A parent facing uncertainty can persist through hardship when guided by their purpose to support and protect their family. Purpose reframes fear. It doesn't eliminate the challenge, but it makes the challenge worth it. To harness this shift, you must identify what truly matters to you: values, goals, people, causes, or dreams that light a fire inside you. The process starts by asking meaningful questions. Why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? What kind of impact do I want to make? What would I regret not doing? These questions help create emotional clarity. When the answers become clear, fear loses its ability to paralyze. Your actions are no longer driven by the need to feel safe, but by the desire to fulfill something significant. This shift from fear to purpose also changes your relationship with discomfort. In the presence of purpose, discomfort becomes acceptable, even welcome. Athletes train through pain because the goal is clear. Artists work through doubt because the vision matters more. Entrepreneurs face risk because their mission drives them. None of them are fearless. They simply act from a deeper motivation. When you are deeply committed to a purpose, you no longer require the absence of fear. You develop the ability to act alongside it, because your attention is fixed on something more meaningful. There's also a practical benefit to purpose-driven focus. It helps filter your decisions. When fear shows up, you can assess whether it's aligned with your greater goals. If it's just resistance trying to keep you safe, you can move through it. If it's a genuine signal warning you of misalignment with your values, you can make adjustments. Purpose becomes the compass that helps you distinguish fear that's protective from fear that's limiting. It sharpens your discernment. Purpose is also energizing. Fear drains mental and emotional energy. It creates tension, overthinking, and hesitation. But purpose fills you with direction, resolve, and flow. Even when results are slow or uncertain, purpose sustains your effort. It reminds you that your actions have meaning beyond the outcome. That mindset makes you more resilient. You recover from setbacks faster because you're not working for approval or comfort. You're working from conviction. The final and perhaps most important effect of purpose is identity transformation. When your life is guided by fear, your identity slowly shrinks to match your insecurities. But when your life is guided by purpose, your identity expands to meet the challenge. You begin to see yourself as someone with a mission, not just someone with emotions. You take ownership of your path. You no longer ask, "What if I fail?" as your first question. Instead, you ask, "What impact can I make? And who will benefit if I move forward?" By making purpose your focus, you replace fear with something more powerful, meaning. And when your mind is fully aligned with meaning, fear loses its ability to distract, derail, or dominate. You no longer live to avoid what you're afraid of. You live to accomplish what you're here for. In that shift, fear is not only weakened, it is dismantled. It can no longer compete with a life driven by purpose. Destroying fear forever is not about a single moment of bravery. It's about developing a mental framework that sustains courage over time. Many people make the mistake of thinking that one bold action is enough to remove fear permanently. But the truth is, fear can return in new forms with new disguises. What defeats it is not just willpower, it is structure. A long-term mental framework gives you the tools to face fear every time it appears, not just once. It's about creating a mindset so rooted in clarity, strength, and direction that fear no longer dictates your behavior. This framework becomes your mental foundation, a system of beliefs and practices that strengthen you from the inside out. The first layer of this framework is understanding that courage is not an emotion, it is a decision. People wait for fear to disappear before they act, but that's not how courage is built. Courage is choosing to act even while fear is present. When this becomes a rule in your thinking, you stop making decisions based on comfort. You start basing them on alignment with your values, your goals, and your growth. This shift in how you interpret fear gives you power. You start to see fear not as a reason to stop, but as a signal to start. The decision to lean in, rather than back away, becomes automatic over time. Another essential part of the framework is building routines that support emotional resilience. Fear often shows up when you're tired, disorganized, or disconnected from your purpose. That's why it's vital to create structure in your daily life, practices that bring you back to your center. Journaling, physical movement, focused breathing, goal setting, and intentional reflection are not just habits. They are tools for anchoring your mind. These small daily practices develop mental stability, and that stability prepares you for moments when fear attempts to resurface. Your nervous system responds differently when it's trained. You don't spiral into panic as easily. You don't collapse under uncertainty. You respond with calm control. Equally important is the belief system you build into this framework. Many people carry subconscious beliefs that fuel their fear. I'm not good enough. If I fail, I'll lose everything. I can't handle rejection. These beliefs act like background programs, running silently but influencing everything. To destroy fear forever, you must become aware of these beliefs and replace them with stronger ones. I can handle discomfort. Mistakes help me grow. I create my outcomes. I define my value. This isn't about repeating empty affirmations. It's about rewiring your internal dialogue through evidence and repetition. Every time you act with courage, you're proving a new belief. Over time, these beliefs harden into your identity. Another key aspect of the long-term framework is commitment to growth over outcome. Fear often comes from attaching your worth to results. You fear rejection because you think failure means you're not enough. But when your goal shifts from impressing others to evolving yourself, fear starts to fade. You understand that setbacks are part of progress. You realize that the value is in the process, not just the prize. With this mindset, you begin to chase growth rather than perfection, and that chase makes fear less relevant. It no longer has a place in your thinking because your focus is on becoming, not performing. Also crucial is building a strong internal support system, your own voice, yourself, coaching, your ability to encourage yourself when no one else does. Too many people depend on external validation to feel secure, but when you develop the habit of speaking powerfully to yourself, you become your own motivator. You remind yourself of past wins, of your inner strength, of your capacity to adapt and overcome. This self-reliance doesn't mean you ignore support from others. It means you stop needing it to act. You don't wait for applause to move. You move because you are driven by something internal and unshakable. Finally, a long-term mental framework must include vision. Fear tends to dominate people who only think about what they're afraid to lose. But vision shifts your mind to what you have the potential to gain. Vision pulls you forward. It gives fear less space to operate because your attention is consumed by what you're building, who you're becoming, and what's possible. When your focus is fixed on what you want to create, your life, your legacy, your impact, fear becomes just another voice in the crowd. And like background noise, you learn to hear it without letting it guide you. This is how fear is destroyed, not in one act, but in the architecture of your thinking. You design a mindset that is ready for fear before it shows up. You prepare your beliefs, habits, identity, and vision so powerfully that fear no longer stands a chance. It may whisper, it may try to return, but your framework makes it irrelevant. That is what destroys fear not just today, but forever.